everyone, to our episode of The Colors of Parenthood. Take a seat and enjoy yourself while diving into some serious topics about parenthood. Hi, this is our episode with Sarah Byrne, and we're going to talk about her transition into motherhood. So, just as a beginning, Sarah, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Where do you live? What do you do?
Hi, I'm Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. I am an American who lives in England. I've lived abroad for quite some time. I have a nearly 12-year-old daughter. Her birthday is next Friday. Um, and I currently work in a primary school, but I also do period and life coaching and a content creator, hoping to get into digital marketing. So, yeah,
Great. Happy birthday to your daughter.
thank you.
um, so, now, would you tell us a bit more about your postpartum journey? Like, when did you give birth? What was it like? Was it like you supposed to be, or
I mean, I don't think that anyone really knows the journey of like what you will have because you only ever hear like the super positive stories. And I think, like my labor was 4 days. I was in labor for 4 days. It was quite intense. I think it was back to back. So as in her spine was against my spine and it was all just very painful. And yeah, so it wasn't this, and also I had quite a lot of anxiety. I was quite ill throughout most of my pregnancy, so I kind of just wanted it to be over. And yeah, it wasn't what I expected. I kind of thought I'd have this baby and she'd sleep through the night and I would have my life and it would be great and she would slot right in, which is definitely not what happened. It was very much I had to figure out or try to mold myself into something that fit her life. And I think a lot of times moms don't realize just how much their lives are going to change um, until it happens. And you can think you're prepared, but you actually aren't prepared at all. So, yeah.
yeah, with a lot of moms that I talk about all the time is like you think you're prepared, and I think most of the mothers are actually like a lot of parents are reading books about how to be a parent, but not about the transition between like womanhood or manhood to parenthood. So I reckon this is a big transition, and it's a lot like a stigmatized topic. What would you say were the first signs that you realize you don't have baby blues and you have something more?
I don't think I ever realized. It wasn't until COVID happened and I was having therapy during that time. So, I mean, my daughter must have been 9 at that point. And she was saying to me, I think that you must have had undiagnosed postpartum depression when I was talking about my transition from, my transition into motherhood and how challenging I found it and how poorly my daughter was and things like that. And so, I think again, I'm in the UK and there is a lot of talk about postpartum depression before you have a baby, but there isn't, I found in my instance, the only thing that I was being given or being offered when I said, I find this really difficult, is that they wanted to give me pills. Um, and I, at that time, was breastfeeding and I didn't really want antidepressants. I wanted something else, like talk therapy or something of that sort. But I do think that, I probably always knew something wasn't quite right, but I was never honest enough with myself to sort of say, this isn't right. And I also didn't have a very close relationship with my own birth mother. So I think that my idea of it was very skewed as to like how it should be.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of like studies showing that it really depends also about your relationship with your birth mom and how she perceived to be a mom and her experience with having a child. Um, so what was the most misconceptions that you found out like after you became a mom?
Yeah. Oh gosh. So I think I thought that I don't think that I realized just how much hypocrisy or judgmental behaviors or attitudes I would come across. I think, if you breastfeed, you breastfeed, but the bottle feeding mothers are angry at you because you're breastfeeding and that's something that they perhaps tried and weren't successful with. Or breastfeeding parents or mothers, or they look down their nose at bottle feeding parents. And I think that this misconception that one type of feeding or one type of one choice in how you want to raise your child, there are as many ways to raise your child as there are people. I think one hard fast rule is that you don't know what you're doing. Your baby did not come with a textbook or a manual, so you have to make whatever your ideals are fit in with your child. So just because I could breastfeed doesn't mean that the next mum can breastfeed. And it doesn't matter how you feed your baby, just feed your kid. I don't really mind. Um, so I think the fact that I needed to fit into this box of how I was raised was also a thing that sort of I was challenged by, because I don't want to raise my daughter the way that I was raised. I want to do things differently, and I think that was something that I've really had to work on, is trying not to slide back into what I remember or what I had done for me. Um so yeah, to do things differently.
Mm. And when you say about breastfeeding, would you did you had a lot of like friends that were the same, like becoming new moms as well when you were?
No, so I became so it's quite funny. I have a really good friend who lives in Ireland, and she got pregnant, and my husband and I were over in Ireland, and I came home and was like, that's it, I want to have a baby. I want to have a baby. And that was it. And then we got pregnant, and I knew absolutely no one pregnant at the same time as myself. So, where I live, there are quite a lot of children. It is a very family friendly town. Um, and I was really fortunate enough to be able to go to La Leche League. So, breastfeeding club is what I called it. So I met a lot of friends there. And there was another group called the Instinctive Parenting Group. And so I met friends there as well. But they were not people that I knew outside of being pregnant or having a baby around the same time. So no, I didn't. It was very interesting being pregnant on your own, really.
Yeah, because I found that a lot of mothers say that they need like the support, like the friend support, relatives, family, whatever, just type of support that people can understand them. And in that sense, I imagine if I become pregnant, I would love to have a friend with me that's pregnant as well, and then we have children that we can help each other if something happens. And when you say about those clubs about breastfeeding or instinctive parents, did you say
Yeah.
were they talking about also mental health and how to help yourself when you become a parent in that sense?
Not really. I think with La Leche, it is a lot about the mother, but it's also a lot about the baby and sort of just helping the baby feed properly. And there's a whole host of problems and challenges that can come with that. So there wasn't a whole lot about those conversations that I was having anyway. Um, and the instinctive parenting, no, again, it was more about how you could use I guess more gentle parenting styles, and how you would go about allowing to raise your baby sort of as more child led, as opposed to lots of rules and boundaries and that kind of thing. Um, so no, short answer is no, there wasn't a lot. I don't recall or remember there being a lot about mental health.
I probably if there was like a, I don't know, a lecture or something, or talking about how are you feeling, what you're supposed to feel, or like what is, I don't know, um what you're supposed saying what society say you should feel, but what is also really normal to feel, because I think that's really lacking. Probably, would you say that this would help for you to realize that something's wrong?
Yeah, and I mean, going back to your support network, like I had my husband, and I had a friend, And then I met another friend, or I made another friend who had a baby a month later. And then through her, 3 months later, we met the woman who is going to be our nanny. So, like, I did not have a support network. I was trying to raise a child in a country that wasn't my own, that isn't my own. Like, I'm not English. I just moved here. And I had at that point been here for 3 years, and I still didn't really feel like I fit in. So I think the lack of a larger support network probably really hindered my mental health, and that journey. And I think, it would have been really helpful to have more people who knew me, because perhaps someone would have said, hey, like, this isn't right, like how you are. And I do chuckle, because I did have a friend down in London, and we had gone down for something, probably my daughter's passport, because US you have to go to the embassy. And years later, I was talking to her, and I was like, oh my god, like, my therapist said the craziest thing, like, that I had undiagnosed postpartum depression. And she was like, love, you definitely had postpartum depression. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, how was I supposed to say anything? So you were hanging by a thread all the time. How do you even approach that? And so I think for a lot of people, it is a very gentle or delicate subject. And if the mother is already feeling quite delicate, that conversation is something that some friends don't necessarily want to have. Um, and I don't know how I would have reacted if my friend had said, hey, do you think that maybe, like, you should speak to someone, you know?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. How would I say to a friend of mine if I see that she has the signs? But because I'm just like reading about it, talking with women, I would try to say it. But I think it's just like when people are not aware like the severe symptoms that can become, how they can affect your motherhood and the joy of motherhood. And because of that, maybe they're afraid to say something. Was your husband aware of like what is postpartum depression, and was he supportive in that sense?
I mean, my husband has always been supportive of anything. I think it should be noted that Audrey had severe reflux and double tongue tie, and there was a lot going on when she was little. And so I think, really, for the first couple of years, 3 years of her life, we were literally just surviving. And that was really tough. I think we probably didn't realize just how difficult being parents was going to be. I think I struggled with living in the UK at that time. I didn't find it a very friendly place. So my mental health was probably not that great before I got pregnant. And then on top of that, having to deal with a baby who wasn't very well and who screamed all the time, and who struggled to breastfeed, and was constantly being sick. And I think a lot of that pressure was on the both of us. And my husband was incredibly supportive and tried. And he would come home from work after working 8 hours a day and take her so I could go and have a bath for half an hour. And like, he definitely did so much, and probably a lot more than a lot of fathers are able to do. um but I don't know if he was in a space where he could recognize that my mental health was as low as it was, just because we were both in the thick of it, so to speak.
Okay. And would you say that you also didn't want to say that much? Because there is this like cycle of thoughts that mothers usually have, that they shouldn't say anything to their husband because they have a lot of on their plate as well, and you're supposed to be a mom, you're supposed to do that, so why would you feel that way? Were you say like you didn't want to also admit that you didn't felt as you would want to?
I don't know if I had a very good understanding of how one should feel when they had a baby, because I didn't have a great example myself from my own birth mother. She wasn't very loving, and she didn't raise me, and she didn't really want me around. So I think I struggled with trying to not be like her. And so I would just beat myself up about it all the time if I didn't feel like I was a good enough parent. And I think the guilt was very real. I felt pretty much guilty my entire pregnancy, not for any particular reason, just because I was pregnant. Um, and I do think that there probably was an element of not wanting to say anything, but there was an element of just not even having that awareness because I was so angry all the time because my baby was poorly and I couldn't fix her and I was having to do it alone. And I think there was quite a lot of resentment. Um, and I just never enjoyed it. And I think now looking back, like as I said, she's going to be 12 next week. And looking back and watching other people with their babies, it does make me really quite sad to know that I missed out on all of that because I wasn't in a place to play or get on the floor and be involved in watching her grow up. I was doing the bare minimum of just making sure she survived and making sure I survived. So yeah.
And when would you say that changed? Like, at what point exactly? You said during COVID, but like, how did it happen?
I was really struggling to manage working from home and having her at home and having my husband at home. And there were a lot of arguments because homeschool, there's a reason we don't homeschool our children. And her school was amazing with their setup and all of that. Like it wasn't lack of work to do or lack of structure. It was her not wanting to do the structure. And I think, she's not a child that like skips into school because she loves lessons and learning. She'd much rather be playing or running and doing some sort of sport. So it was really difficult and I really struggled with that. And I consequently was working at her primary school. It's the primary school that I work at now. And one of my colleagues is a psychotherapist. And because of the stress of COVID, she offered a few sessions to some of the people who work in the primary school, and I took her up on that because I love therapy. I think it's amazing. And when we were talking about a lot of what I was going through and how I was feeling, she just happened to mention that she felt like I was describing, or she felt that I was describing postpartum depression and those feelings. And she then sort of put two and two together, and we talked about my birth and or like my birth with my daughter and like how that all sort of panned out. And she was just saying she sort of deduced that I probably most likely had postpartum depression that was never healed. And I was just sort of managing day to day, and that COVID and the stress of that brought a lot of it back up. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, when you say it never healed, I think this is the most concerning about not talking about postpartum depression is because the untreated one could potentially just be really prolonged, which would definitely affect the way you feel about becoming a mom and how you express yourself when you're a parent. Would you say that the NHS had like a, I don't know, because usually I believe that there should be like the EPDS screening too happening from time to time after you gave birth, right? Was
So
was
I
there
went
anything?
in at one point and said, I am sad all the time. I don't feel like this is what I should be experiencing. And the GP just kind of looked at me, and I think we did the test or whatever. They ask you questions at one of your um I think they ask you questions at one of your, is it like your 6 week checkup or something, 8 week checkup, where they sort of sign you off to be able to do physical activity. They will do the questionnaire with you. But they're very easy answers to flub. They're very easy questions to go, I can't say that because they'll think something's wrong, so I'm going to say this. And I distinctly remember not being very honest for that. But when I went back to the GP, she just looked at me and was like, well, what do you want? Pills? And I was like, no, I'd really quite like some therapy. And she's like, well, all I can give you is pills, or here's a number. You can ring them and see if you can get on the waiting list. And the waiting list at that time for that particular service was that you had to choose a day and a time and go at that day, at that time, but without your children. And it's like, I'm a mother who lives abroad who has a 5-month old baby. Like, how is that possible? And all of the evening appointments were always taken up because that's when the majority of people could go. Um, and so I waited for over a year for that service, and it never happened.
Yeah, I think with that's the main problem with the NHS with the waiting list. But that sounds really not supportive the way that she said about the pills. Because also you said you were breastfeeding, right? And I think like usually they wouldn't give you pills if you're breastfeeding. I am not sure here, but I don't know.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
is
that particular
surprising.
GP was pretty rubbish, to be honest. And she still
Mm.
isn't that great. I'm not sure if she's still at the GP, but I've definitely seen her since, like within the last year, and she wasn't amazing. So I think that was kind of the biggest shock, was just having a female GP be so completely unsupportive. Um,
Mm.
and also just not having ever spoken about, like, I never, until I was pregnant and saw the midwife, I had absolutely no idea postpartum depression even existed. And I was nearly 30. You know, like I was 29 when I had my daughter, and I had no idea it existed because we don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, would you say that if you knew at least that it exists, so you would know like where to search for help, resources? I reckon that's for me. If I get pregnant and something happens, I know where to seek help. I know what to do. So this makes me like just okay. I feel okay about that. Would you
I
say
think
that would help?
I think education is always key. I think that there is a huge, because again it's not talked about, there is a huge component of each mother who's going to say, that can't be me, that can't be me, because we don't know the number of women that actually do suffer. Like, it could be, I mean, I don't know if you know percentages, but like it could be an incredibly high number. Like 85% of mothers will suffer from postpartum depression at some point in their postpartum, right? But we have no idea of that because the majority of women still don't talk about the fact that they have postpartum depression. So I think if we realized, if we were educated enough about it and knew the signs, the problem is if you're in the middle of it, you aren't going to necessarily know or recognize the signs, even if they are blatantly in front of you. So having other people aware of the signs, and also, I think having more transparency around how many mothers do have or do suffer from some form of postpartum depression. Even going so far as to talk about postpartum psychosis, because again, that is another thing, another syndrome that is very real that we don't talk about.
Yeah, definitely. The number is like 20-25% of mothers are experiencing postpartum depression, but I think the most shocking for me is that 85% are untreated and underdiagnosed. So we're actually not sure about
I would
the percentage itself.
I would say that way more mothers. And saying that, maybe I should back up and say mothers in modern, like in sort of countries where people are working quite a lot, they're not necessarily in the nuclear, or like they don't have that village anymore. I think they will most certainly have a higher percentage of postpartum depression sufferers that probably don't say anything. I think places in the world that still live within a society where you've got cousins and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and moms and dads and grandfathers and great aunts and great, like, I think when you've got that system in place, perhaps those mothers don't find that they have postpartum depression as much because they have the support and they've got people around them who can recognize, when they're not themselves. Whereas if you're like me, who live in a foreign country, who didn't have a great or a large support network, you are kind of in the middle of it on your own because you don't have enough people around to realize how much you've changed.
Yeah. And I think because a lot of the big issue around having postpartum depression would be that you don't want to admit that there is
Yes.
something wrong with you, because you start thinking that maybe I'm failing as a mom as well, so everything's starting to get off. You just become, as you said, you feeling guilt, you're ashamed of yourself, so you don't want to say it out loud, and people won't come to you because they don't know it exists, or because you don't have the network or community. So I definitely agree that community is quite important. But coming from Bulgaria, which is like an eastern country, here people just don't know that this exists. So especially if we have the relatives, because we have a lot of big families here usually, and
Yeah.
everyone lives in the same place. So we have I have my mom, grandpa, everything is here. But the thing is, like, they can be judgmental as well, in that sense that they would be like, this wouldn't happen when you were my child, like I would never felt that way. And that was my mom told me that when I said, so I'm working for this and we're talking about postpartum depression, and she was like, that exists? Like, I can't imagine being sad after having you. And I felt that after that I started being in communities with moms, and I just saw like how mothers can be really judgmental as well, because they don't experience it. And have you ever felt that? Well, you said about the breastfeeding, but with the breastfeeding is that women who are not breastfeeding also feel a lot of judgment from society, because people are saying there is more nutrition, the attachment and everything is important there. But would you say you felt judged from mothers because you felt sad?
Definitely. Like I had one woman come up to me during a La Leche meeting and she said, if I had your baby and my baby cried as much as yours did, I wouldn't want to live.
Oh my god.
And it's like, wow. And you
Yeah.
feel already, I think I felt like an awful parent because I couldn't get my baby to stop crying. And, it was very much down to the fact that she had really bad reflux and she was vomiting all the time and it's acid and she was very uncomfortable. But she screamed. Like they used to laugh because they could hear us coming from the entrance of, and so I'd walk into this child development center and they could hear us because she'd scream the whole way down the hall, and I would just sob because I didn't know what to do. And I didn't, and I felt very much like I was failing as a parent. I think motherhood is one of the most judgmental jobs a woman will ever have. You can be judged for anything. You can be judged because you give your baby a bottle. You can be judged because you cloth nappy. You can be judged because you put your child in a Montessori nursery. You can be judged because you breastfeed, and you can be judged because you put your child in pink and they're a girl, and oh my gosh, what are you doing gendering them? There, just back off and let people do what they need to do. I genuinely do not care what you dress your baby in as long as it's appropriate for weather. How you feed your child, just make sure it isn't crying because I still can't handle crying. And quite honestly, I'd rather you use a more natural alternative to like diapers and nappies, but that's mainly because I don't want to live in a landfill. Like I genuinely don't care what you do as long as your baby is happy, healthy, warm, fed, like you do you, love. And whether that's because I felt so judged, I don't know, but it is one of the most judgmental jobs I feel.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's only you. That's every mom that I speak with.
Yeah.
All of them are saying, like, being a mom, everyone is judging you, other moms as well. And also just like passengers on the street, because your baby's crying. And a woman just might look at your baby and the judgmental eyes. And then you start thinking, she thinks that I'm a bad mom. And then this is internalizing, you ruminating about these thoughts. And I can just imagine. And that's really scary. me as not being a mom, it sounds really scary becoming one, but also I think we should, because when we speak about postpartum, the experience, not only depression but the anxiety that comes with like thinking about, I'm really worried about my child being safe all the time. So you start having these intrusive thoughts. What if something happens? What if something happens? And I think education here would really help. And even like the scenario when someone is judging you, just to know what you say back, because you know that other women are experiencing that. And I think that's really helping to know that you're not alone.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's strength in numbers, isn't it? And, unfortunately, I was alone in the fact that I didn't know any other baby who had reflux that cried as much as my baby
Mm,
did. And I think that was really difficult because I already felt quite alone in the town that I was in. Um, but yeah, I definitely think education is key, and more so than the education that they're giving. I think having the conversation around postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis needs to be more mainstream. It needs to be more at the forefront of talking about, it should be a conversation from the minute you find out you're pregnant. It shouldn't just wait until like your
definitely.
third trimester. We should be talking about it all the time. It should be everywhere. And it should be that women are trained, like our La Leche volunteers, or women who do the drop-in groups and all of that. They should be trained in learning and spotting the signs of postpartum depression. Because I think the downside or the knock-on effect of that is that you then will have a child who isn't as well rounded as they could be. I mean, you depending on the level of depression, you may have a mum who shuts down and doesn't speak to that child, which then means that that child is never spoken to, which then is a knock-on effect to the speech and language and the understanding and the social skills. So, there is so much that is almost not hindered, but there's so much that counts on the mother being happy and healthy and able to raise that child and thrive, that when something is off, like postpartum depression, it's not just the mum that suffers. Everybody
Yeah,
does.
the whole family dynamic, definitely. And because we always say like the mom is expected of doing this and this and that because she basically delivered the child, she's feeding the child, she's always there, that's her 24/7 job. So when something's off, it's, I think, probably natural that people would judge the mom.
I'm
But
not sure
it's
if you
also,
heard, but like that, my daughter was knocking on the door at the beginning of our conversation. The door is shut. She can clearly hear us talking because I don't have headphones on. If that had been my husband, she would have knocked once. He wouldn't have responded. She'd have gone. She knocked four times.
mm, yeah, I think that's a really, really long conversation. Like I can see not even being a mom, but like the societal expectations of becoming a woman, and then what are expected of you as a woman, and then when you're a mom, as there is a lot of like illustrations of how a mother is with the trolley with the child outside, and it's like that's her job. But when is a dad, it's like good for him. That's a great dad. And
I,
probably you felt like that, right?
I mean, my husband is amazing, and I don't just say that. Like, I obviously now have a lot of mum friends whose husbands
Mm,
don't do near as much. I literally came home from lunch today to a clean kitchen and chocolate chip cookie dough chilling in the fridge so
mhm,
that he could bake us cookies this evening. Like, I'm very lucky in the fact that he is very hands on. And I think part of that is because he had to be, because I was very hands off. I would
mhm,
I would lose the capacity to even mother myself, much less try to mother a baby, because I was just so exhausted. Um and I think I am very lucky in the sense that he, yes, it my life has changed, and there is very much that you can see. It's very apparent. Knocking on the door is one, constantly asking me for food. With her dad, if she went and said, can I have such and such, and he says no, wait for dinner, that would have been the end of it. Whereas if it's me, it's a constant like, but why? But why? Can I have this? Can I have that? Can I have this? So it's never, there is a definite dynamic shift when it's mum versus dad. And I think, regardless of how amazing the dad is, that
Yeah.
will always be, it isn't
Hmm.
just my life anymore. It's my life and her life. We're a package deal. If I
Yeah.
go back to the US, she goes back to the US. If I, if for whatever reason my husband and I got divorced, she would be with me, not with him, and it's not like it would be 50-50, but she would be my responsibility. And
Yeah.
whether that is because that is my DNA makeup as a mom, I don't know. But there is no question that it's me and it's her. Whereas for some instances, he still has his autonomy. He can still make decisions just for himself.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, probably it's the way it is. And it's not something within us or within the men or society or whatever, but I think it's a really good thing to speak about it. Because when people are aware of that, some things might change when it comes to how you support new moms overall. So it probably is like that just because we have different roles, because biologically we're different, but it's a good thing to speak about it and to admit that moms have a different role and probably it's heavier. So
I
yeah.
mean, I was reading an article. Well, it was a blurb, it wasn't a full article from, I think it was The Atlantic today. And it was about how when the woman is pregnant, some of the fetal DNA goes outside of the womb into the woman so that we actually absorb some of the fetal DNA. And we obviously have absorbed mother's DNA. So, like, the whole sort of generational, like, I call it epigenetics, I think is what it's called. It's fascinating. So, like, I will always carry a part of my daughter in me,
Yeah.
and I will always carry a part of my birth mom in me, and I will always carry a part of my grandmother in me, and so on and so forth. And so I think that, there is a lot to be said genetically of how connected mum and baby are.
Definitely. um so as a last question, I wanted to ask, what would you say to women who are in similar position as you, like when you were a mom in the beginning, the first 3 years for instance, like where would they seek support in the UK? Are there like any advice that you can tell them?
I mean, I think the biggest support that you can find if you are breastfeeding and going to a La Leche,
Hmm.
they were instrumental in me managing to feed my daughter for 18 months. It was very difficult. It was really challenging with two tongue ties. They were amazing. In the UK, we have a system where we have midwives when we're pregnant and when we
Yeah.
give birth, and then we have health visitors that you can go to. Having a great health visitor is probably your first port of call when it comes to any sort of um, support for your mental health and baby and things like that. If you're like me and didn't have a good health visitor, then any of the sort of drop-in groups that you can go to that the children development centers will run, they're always great places to try and find some support. And other moms, if you've got friends or you have friends who that have had children before, just being around them and asking them questions and getting a break, like allowing someone else to have your baby is okay. You're not a bad mom for wanting to take a break.
You're just human. I can't imagine like we have these expectations of women, mothers, just holding their baby all the time and being with them all the time. I can imagine this making me crazy, but things will change probably when
Yes.
one becomes pregnant. And
Yes.
also maybe just like online forums now, I think, because when I dig in the internet, there are a lot of communities. So maybe just anonymous communities for postpartum mental health. Probably this would help. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that wasn't really something that was around for me. Um, and I think
Hmm.
it probably would have benefited me a lot more because I didn't have a huge support network in the town that I was in. So having something like Mom Sanity would have been amazing because it allows you to make those connections with other women who are in a similar situation or who maybe were in a similar situation and are now not. They are, I think online communities are a fantastic way to just almost broaden your connection with other people because they don't have to be in the town that you're in. They could be in Bulgaria or they could be in the US or they
Yeah.
can be in France or wherever they are. They don't have to be in the near vicinity. And that then just allows you to have more scope of finding someone who gets you and who understands
Yeah.
and who can help support you.
Yeah, and being able to find someone that's in the similar position in the like the other part of the world, that's amazing. So I would say like this, like the internet now, this is like the best part of it, that we can find and just feeling understood by people that we don't even know in person.
Yes.
I think that's a
Yeah,
great thing.
absolutely. And it's huge. And I think, again, it's just that mutual understanding and feeling like you're not being judged.
Yeah. Okay, Sarah, that was a great conversation. I had a wonderful time, and thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.